Howdy folks, and welcome to How to Not Suck at Armoured Warfare with the mighty Jingles. Armoured Warfare, the new tank combat game from Obsidian Entertainment, which has come under substantial criticism from the World of Tanks community for being nothing more than a clone of World of Tanks. This isn't a particularly fair accusation. There are certainly lots of similarities between Armoured Warfare and World of Tanks, and those similarities are entirely intentional. It's the World of Tanks audience that Obsidian Entertainment are going after with this game, after all. But there are also substantial differences, and while experience that you've learned playing World of Tanks will set you in relatively good stead, at first, when you start playing Armoured Warfare, it isn't going to take too long before the differences start to catch you out, and so that's what the purpose of today's video is. So join me as I take you gently by the transmission and guide you through the pitfalls of the tank destroyer-infested battlefield of Armoured Warfare, and show you how to not trip up and do yourself an injury. First, the similarities. Both games give you online multiplayer PvP tank versus tank action, teams of 15 per side, fighting on various different maps in various different types of vehicles. Both games have an almost identical interface, team panels at the top left and right of the screen, team markers at the top of the screen, scores at the top of the screen, a tank information panel in the bottom left corner, and a minimap in the bottom right corner. Whichever vehicle you're controlling at the time is controlled in exactly the same way in both games. You steer with the WASD keys, you turn the turret and therefore the gun with the mouse, you fire with the left mouse button, right clicking on an enemy vehicle locks your aim onto that vehicle. The various different levels of zoom are controlled using the mouse wheel if you have one. If you don't, then pressing shift snaps you into an enhanced zoom mode. Exactly the same in World of Tanks as it is in Armoured Warfare, and this is entirely intentional. Obsidian are not trying to reinvent the wheel here. They want people to come into Armoured Warfare and not have to sit through a huge tutorial learning how to drive the tank and recognise the various different UI elements on the game screen. They have quite deliberately copied the control interface from World of Tanks so that anybody who has played World of Tanks will know what they're doing the first time they start playing Armoured Warfare. There are of course significant differences, and they're not just superficial. If you've been paying attention to this random battle that's been playing in the background while I've been talking, you might have noticed certain things popping up on screen as I've been playing. Well, we're going to stop and take a look at some of those in greater detail. Okay, first things first, I've just fired upon and hit an M60 Starship with the 85mm gun on my tank destroyer. It's telling me I've hit him, it's telling me how much damage I've done, and it's also telling me sniper bonus. The sniper bonus is something that's specific to tank destroyers. Basically, when you fire long-range shots and hit and penetrate and do damage, you get bonus damage. Next, something that's going to be very familiar to people who play tank destroyers in World of Tanks. When I fired, all of the concealment around me was obliterated by the muzzle blast, and my position was given away. I've now been spotted. How do I know I've been spotted? Well, there's a dirty great big icon at the top of the UI there saying, spotted. World of Tanks players who have experienced tank crews will be entirely familiar with this. It's exactly the same mechanic as the Sixth Sense perk, which becomes available on your commanders if they're sufficiently well trained. The difference here in Armoured Warfare is that everybody gets it right from the start. And that's not all. Let's just rewind the clock and have a look at another UI element that you don't get in World of Tanks. This is the point right before I fired at that M60. Have a look at the tank information panel on the bottom left corner of the screen. There's a dynamic camouflage indicator down there, and you can see exactly how much camo rating your tank has at any given time, and you can see that effect that things like firing your gun have on it. Watch what happens when I pull the trigger. Here I am sitting in my bush like a good tank destroyer should. Nice camo rating, target pops up, move forward, lose a little camo rating, fire, bang. All of my camo gets obliterated, I'm instantly detected. If you're paying attention to the UI, even if you don't understand the game mechanics, the UI is not just telling you that you have been spotted, it's explaining to you exactly why you have been spotted. The information is all there on screen. And things are about to get much worse. Because I've been spotted, there's a swing-fire armoured fighting vehicle about to take an interest in my well-being. How do I know that? Well, once again, the game's going to give me a warning. Watch the top of the UI. There. What's happening right now is the game is warning me that I am being targeted by an anti-tank guided missile. And if I continue to sit here while I have been spotted and somebody's aiming a missile at me, any damage that I take is going to be entirely my own fault. And so, of course, that's exactly what I do. And it's entirely my own fault. The game warned me multiple times, move dumbass, somebody is about to fire a missile at you. Now, the idea of warning people that they're about to get shot at is certainly not new, and Armoured Warfare certainly didn't invent it. World of Tanks has had it for quite some time when they revamped the crew skills ages ago. The difference is that here in Armoured Warfare, it's not something that you have to unlock. Everybody gets it all the time in every vehicle that they drive. And these kind of warnings don't just extend to when you've been spotted and when you're being targeted by an anti-tank guided missile. World of Tanks players are going to love this next part. You also get a warning when you're being targeted by artillery. Not today, Artie. Not today. This time I actually paid attention to the warning. That and that alone is worth the ticket price. And of course, there is no ticket price because Armoured Warfare, like World of Tanks, is a free-to-play game. And again, on a superficial level, you're going to see these kind of similarities between Armoured Warfare and World of Tanks. You're going to see things in Armoured Warfare that remind you a lot of some of the crew skills and perks that you get in World of Tanks. The difference being, in Armoured Warfare you don't have to unlock them by having experienced tank crews. Instead, in Armoured Warfare, you get them just given to you for free. Here's another example, coming right up. Just as I swing my targeting cursor on this guy, right there, those icons tell me that the guy under my targeting cursor has damaged suspension and a damaged engine. Again, you get this in World of Tanks. It's a commander perk called Eagle Eye. Works in exactly the same way. And again, the difference is that in World of Tanks you have to unlock it, and in Armoured Warfare it's on all the time and everybody gets it. So, up until now, you've pretty much seen the similarities between Armoured Warfare and World of Tanks. Yes, they've got kind of the same crew skills so far as you get in World of Tanks, the difference being that Armoured Warfare kind of enhances and improves upon them and gives them to you for free. What are the actual differences between Armoured Warfare and World of Tanks, beyond the purely superficial? Well, since we're talking about crew skills, we may as well start there. This is the AMX-10P. It's a Tier 3 armoured fighting vehicle. And this is the commander of my AMX-10P, Sabrina Washington. She hails from San Diego in the USA, and she brings various different bonuses to any vehicle that she commands. She's not restricted to serving in the AMX-10P. She actually commands a whole range of my vehicles. I tend to put Sabrina, because her skills fit the task, into things like armoured fighting vehicles and light tanks. I have other commanders for tank destroyers and other commanders for main battle tanks and artillery, but we're taking a look at Sabrina for the moment. The various different bonuses that she has unlocked, in exactly the same way that you unlock different crew skills in World of Tanks, are Vigilant, which increases her vision range by 10%, and that applies to any vehicle that she commands. When she reaches rank 2, you have the option of choosing either Take Aim, which is improving the aim speed by 10%, or Target Spotted Evade, which increases the hull traverse speed by 20% for 10 seconds after spotting an enemy. At rank 3, she unlocks Blending In, which increases the camo factor of any vehicle that she commands by 10%. At rank 4, I've chosen Hidden Gunner. Your visibility penalty while shooting is reduced by 30%. I could have gone for Fitness Training, which would have increased the crew hit points of any vehicle that she commands by 20%, and then when she eventually reaches rank 5, which isn't going to take too long, she will learn the Takeover skill, base capture rate improved by 25%. As you can see, the kind of skills that Sabrina Washington has are more suited to scout vehicles, armoured fighting vehicles, light tanks, things like that. And then of course there's the actual crew of the vehicle. Now, unlike the commander, the crew are tied to the vehicle in which they serve. You can't move them from one vehicle to the next. And just to give you a quick look at the kind of crew skills that are available, the crew of the AMX-10P consists of 2 people, the driver and the gunner. I reached rank 2 with the AMX-10P crew, and I have unlocked the Smooth Ride skill for the driver, accuracy while moving improved by 20%, and I have unlocked the Preparation skill for the gunner, ammunition swap speed improved by 20%. There's a whole range of different skills that I could have chosen and which will become available as I continue ranking up the crew. But Sabrina is not the only tank commander that I own. Let's have a look at a main battle tank like the Leopard 1. This is Anthony Diaz. He actually has quite an important bonus. Crew experience gained increased by 10%. It's the accelerated training skill, which is, well, have a look at some of these other commander skills. Some of these skills are very, very powerful. let's have a look at Maximilian Koning. His basic stat, we'll just confirm his selection there, reputation gained in this vehicle increased by 10%. Reputation, let's not forget, is the word that Armoured Warfare uses for experience. That's a 10% experience bonus to every game you play, while Maximilian Koning is the commander of your tank. These are not bad. In fact, I'm probably going to start leveling Maximilian up because I've reached rank 5 on my default main battle tank commander, Philipp Holzklau, who hails from Stuttgart in Germany. We'll just confirm his selection, and you can see that his basic starting skill, Pack Tactics, module damage increased by 20% when he's near any ally vehicle. At rank 2, we've got Fire at Will. Reload time reduced by 10% for 15 seconds when a nearby ally is damaged. At rank 3, I've taken Bullseye. Overall accuracy of every vehicle he commands increased by 10%. At rank 4, Fitness Training increases the crew hit points of any vehicle he commands by 20%. And then at rank 5, Vigilant. Vision range increased by 10%. So there's a huge range of different skills that are available, not just for your crew but also for the commanders, and some of the commanders are very, very powerful skill bonuses. At the moment there are just the 5 commanders that are available, but you can see the scope for expansion that is going to be around in the future. Armoured Warfare have talked about various different types of commander. At the moment, people like Philipp Holzklau here and Sabrina Washington there can crew any vehicle in my garage. And the bonuses that they have, while they're nice, they're pretty general. At some point in the future, they're going to be introducing much more specialised commanders into Armoured Warfare. Commanders that, for example, have very, very powerful bonuses but can only serve in certain types of vehicles. So obviously the bonuses are going to be specific to those type of vehicles. But for now, this is pretty much all we have. While we're in the garage, we may as well take a look at the kind of information that's available to us in the garage and show you exactly how that differs between Armoured Warfare and World of Tanks. Here is the quick look tank information panel showing you the vehicle stats. Now, this is a dynamic display. The equipment modules that you fit to your tank, which are known as retrofits here in Armoured Warfare, will affect these numbers. You can see that with the 105mm gun, the alpha damage is 276, penetration 247mm with the armor-piercing discarding sabot ammunition. It has a sustained damage per minute of 2,671, 1,381 hit points. It will do 64.8 km per hour, 0 to 32 in 6.4 seconds. It shows you the camouflage rating, it shows you the vision range, and then it starts showing you the kind of information that most of us wish was in World of Tanks but just isn't. Things like gun depression, right here under the targeting information, 9 degrees of gun depression and apparently 2.5 degrees of gun elevation, as well as turret traverse, reload time, accuracy spread and targeting time. Next, however, this is where things start to get different. This is where we start to see the real significant differences between Armoured Warfare and World of Tanks. We have a look at the armour pop-out panel here. Now, looking at the Leopard 1, because it just has rolled homogeneous steel armour, we're not seeing any differences between the penetration values of various different types of ammunition that are fired at this tank. If you have a look over here, we can see the turret and hull armour at the front, side and rear. And you'll notice that it says versus armour piercing, high explosive and shaped charges. But this tick box is greyed out. The reason it's greyed out is because the Leopard has steel armour. It has the same effectiveness versus every different ammunition type. This is where things start to get very, very different in Armoured Warfare. And it starts to happen at around about the time you start seeing Tier 4 vehicles. Because Tier 4 is where you start getting vehicles that don't just have rolled homogeneous steel armour. They start getting sneaky with the armour protection on the tanks. Let's have a look at the T-64. Here we go. T-64, Soviet main battle tank. The T-64 has steel and fiberglass composite armour, and what that means is it gets a lot more protection against shaped charge ammunition. What is shaped charge ammunition? Well, it's things like anti-tank guided missiles and high explosive anti-tank ammunition. This checkbox here, it's not greyed out anymore, so we can actually see how effective certain types of armour are going to be against the T-64. By default, armor piercing is selected. And this is all kinds of armor piercing. Armor piercing, high velocity armor piercing discarding sabot, armor piercing fin stabilized discarding sabot. They're all under the armor piercing umbrella. So we can see that the turret of the T64 has 304mm of effective thickness against all kinds of armor piercing ammunition, and the hull at the front of the T64 has 164mm of penetration. If we were to select shaped charge ammunition, those numbers change drastically. The turret is now effectively 432mm thick, and the hull is now effectively 308mm thick. This is the critical point where armoured warfare becomes very, very different from World of Tanks. In World of Tanks, you don't really have to pay too much attention to the type of ammunition that you're firing at whichever target you're currently aiming at. If you have enough penetration with whatever is loaded to defeat the armour of your target, then you pull the trigger. If you don't have enough penetration, or if the armour is angled to a sufficient degree that you're likely to get a bounce, can you hit a weak spot? If you can't hit a weak spot and you don't have enough penetration, then you either need to be somewhere else, or as a last resort, you're going to start firing high explosive. Beyond that, there are relatively few complications. Armour angling is of course a major factor, and it's one of the things that separates the men from the boys in World of Tanks. Then there are other complications with regards to shaped charge ammunition. High explosive anti-tank ammunition, for example, does not like being fired into spaced armour, and it doesn't like being fired into the tracks of enemy tanks. But beyond that, that's pretty much as complicated as it gets in World of Tanks. Also, if you do penetrate a target in World of Tanks, regardless of where you hit them, you're going to do the full damage range of whatever ammunition you have used. It's not that simple in armoured warfare. This is a Tier 3 cooperative battle. I'm in the T62, which is a Tier 3 main battle tank. I'm pretty much just firing high explosive anti-tank ammunition at absolutely everything in this game. Never come across any Tier 4 vehicles in this match. I've never come across anything with composite armour, anything with explosive reactive armour. My high explosive anti-tank ammunition is going to work against absolutely everything. I do have some armour piercing ammunition in case I have to shoot at an equivalent tier main battle tank from the front, and my high explosive anti-tank ammunition is not going to have enough penetration in that case. But that situation just never arises, so I never fire a single shot of the armour piercing ammunition in this match. And this is where people are saying armoured warfare is just like World of Tanks. And it certainly is, at this kind of level. But when you come across those vehicles that do have the kind of armour that necessitates firing the correct type of ammunition against them, things get substantially different. This is the Typhoon II. It's a premium Tier 6 tank destroyer. It's kind of like the E25 in World of Tanks, except it's a bit bigger, and it's got a much, much bigger gun. You can see I have armour piercing, high explosive and shaped charge ammunition equipped, and I'm going to need to use all of it to get a result in this hard difficulty cooperative battle. First target spotted. Now there are a couple of things that I need to take into consideration here, so we're just going to freeze frame it and I'll talk you through it. That is a VFM5, it's a light tank. It doesn't have a lot of armour, but the armour that it does have is composite, so shape charge ammunition, out of the question. It'll do more damage, but it isn't going to penetrate, so that leaves my armour piercing. Unfortunately, it's a light tank. My armour piercing has far too much penetration, so I'm probably going to over-penetrate and not do the full damage range. Luckily, however, he comes around the corner angled, so it turned out that armour piercing actually worked and got quite good results. Over-penetration is a huge factor in armoured warfare, and it just doesn't come into play at all in World of Tanks. In World of Tanks, you generally just fire whatever has the best penetration at whatever you're shooting, and you'll penetrate and you'll do the full damage range. If you fire ammunition that has too much penetration at a lightly armoured target, you will also penetrate, but you will not do the full damage range of the shell, unless you get lucky and the light tank comes around the corner angled, in which case his effective armour is suddenly enough for me to not over-penetrate when I'm firing armour-piercing ammunition. Once you start encountering vehicles that have composite armour and explosive reactive armour, the rules change in armoured warfare. If you have enough penetration with high explosive anti-tank shaped charge ammunition, and you're not going to hit composite or explosive reactive armor, then you fire your shaped charge ammunition, because it does more damage. If your target is covered in composite armor, do not fire shaped charge ammunition at him. Like this Leopard 2 AV here, for example. I'm firing the armor-piercing discarding Sabo ammunition at him, which has more than enough penetration to deal with the side armor of a tank like the Leopard 2. Go for the engine shot. There we go. Knocked out his engine as well, and he's done. Now, this is where things start getting complicated. Explosive reactive armor. This Terminator BMPT, just check this out here. Watch, there. The sides of this tank and the front of this tank are covered in explosive reactive armor packs. They will detonate harmlessly any shell that impacts that armor pack. Sometimes you might get a lucky penetration anyway if you're firing armor piercing with sufficiently high penetration, but generally speaking the first shot against a surface covered in ERA plating is not going to do anything, but it will blow off the ERA plating, so the second shot fired at the same area will penetrate. And this BMPT has given us all kinds of examples of differences between Armoured Warfare and World of Tanks. Why am I not taking the shot at the turret of the BMPT? And the reason I'm not taking the shot is because it's an unmanned turret. It's a non-critical part of the tank, like the commander's hatches. Believe it or not, contrary to what we've been led to believe, you can't actually destroy a tank by knocking its hatches off, unless you get really lucky and the hatch fragments downwards and into the tank and kills the crew. But generally speaking, it's a bad idea. And it's a bad idea in Armoured Warfare too. Instead, I take the shot at the rear of the tank as he comes out from the side of the building, and I hit an area where an explosive reactive armor plate had already been detonated, so my shot goes in, does full damage and kills him. Shooting at hatches, shooting at unmanned turrets, shooting at non-critical parts of tanks does not result in lots and lots of damage. You do minimal damage when you hit those parts of tanks in Armoured Warfare. This, by the way, is the first time I ever completed a hard difficulty cooperative battle in Armoured Warfare. And there's something else that Armoured Warfare does that World of Tanks doesn't. Co-op battles. Playing against the AI. Coming up right next, we've got a shot against an expeditionary tank. Now this is a light tank and it has an unmanned turret. Unfortunately the turret was all I could see, so I took the shot. And there you go, perfect example. Two different things went wrong there. First, I had far too much penetration with my armor piercing, so I overmatched his armor and did minimal damage. And second, I hit an unmanned turret, which is a non-critical part of the tank, so I did even less damage. 242 damage. That's about 50% of the regular damage potential of my armor piercing ammunition. Shaped charge ammunition would have done a little bit more because it wouldn't have over-penetrated, but it still wouldn't have done the full damage range because unmanned turret. Unfortunately, that's all that was available to shoot at, so, well, at least I did some damage. It does start getting a little bit chaotic and messy here. This is not the kind of situation in which you want to be in a tank destroyer. Even more so in Armoured Warfare than in World of Tanks. There are some very, very heavily armoured tank destroyers in World of Tanks. You don't really get that in Armoured Warfare. These things are supposed to stay at the back and not engage people directly. Unfortunately, at this stage of this particular co-op battle, you don't really have a choice. So I was really starting to wish I was in a main battle tank at this point. Coming up, we got another perfect example of what not to do when you're facing explosive reactive armour. That is an M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicle, and I have very foolishly hit him in his explosive reactive armour plating. You can see the sides of the vehicle are covered not only in spaced armour but also in ERA packs. There are also some ERA packs around the turret and at the front. But if I'd had the presence of mind to aim slightly lower, I would have missed the ERA plating and, well, armor piercing with this kind of penetration goes through the spaced side armor like a hot knife through butter, so I did no damage whatsoever in that shot. Although I did remove one of the ERA plates, and a second shot at the same spot would have done full damage. Full damage, like these shots at this Challenger composite armor, but I'm firing armor piercing, and I've got some nice flush shots right at the side of the tank. Look at all of that damage. Next, we're about to get bum rushed by a whole bunch of light tanks and armoured fighting vehicles. This is a Stingray 2, it's a light tank, but he has sufficient composite armour at the front that I'm not going to over-penetrate, and I'm going to get the full damage potential out of every armour-piercing shot that I fire. Coming up behind him, however, we've got a BMP-3. Now, check out the armour package on this thing. Just wait for the right moment and I'll freeze frame it. There we go. The BMP-3 has composite armour. It has an armour cage, which you can see at the back of the turret and the rear of the tank, which is specifically designed to defeat anti-tank guided missiles and shape charge ammunition. In addition to that, you can see all of the explosive reactive armour packs lining the side of the tank, the front of the tank, and the turret of the tank. So where am I going to shoot this guy? Obviously I don't want to be firing shape charge ammunition at him, but similarly I don't want to hit any of those ERA packs because it's just going to nullify my first armour piercing round fired at that location. And I'm starting to get really tired of that happening, so wait for it. There, the flattest part of the front of the tank that does not have ERA plating on it. Pull the trigger, full damage caused. It's all about firing the right kind of ammunition at the right kind of target at the right time. The general rule of thumb, if you have shaped charge ammunition, which includes high explosive anti-tank shells and anti-tank guided missiles, and your target is not covered in composite or explosive reactive armour, and you have enough penetration with your shaped charge ammunition, then that's what you fire, because it has a much higher damage potential. If none of those factors apply, fire armour piercing. If your armour piercing doesn't have enough penetration to deal with the armour of whatever it is you're shooting at, you've just run into a significant problem. You're probably in an M113 trying to deal with the T62 from the front, in which case don't be trying to deal with the T62 from the front. Get around the sides, get around the rear, get somewhere else, anywhere other than the situation in which you find yourself, because you're not going to do any damage and you're probably going to die. If all else fails and you have absolutely no other option, try your luck with high explosive. Of course, there are some vehicles in armoured warfare that only fire high explosive ammunition, and I'm not necessarily talking about artillery, and we'll be coming on to artillery in a minute. Vehicles like the Scorpion, which is a tier 2 armoured fighting vehicle, has a low velocity 76mm gun that only fires high explosive ammunition. But there's more than one type of high explosive ammunition in armoured warfare as well, just as if things weren't complicated enough. There's regular high explosive, which has very low penetration but will do some damage to just about everything that it hits. And then you have high explosive squash head or high explosive plastic ammunition, which is a specialised form of high explosive that doesn't do as much damage as regular high explosive but does significantly more module damage. And just when you thought it was safe, when you thought I'd covered every possible type of ammunition in armoured warfare, there is also high explosive incendiary, which tends to be limited to 20, 25 and 30mm autocannons used in the armoured fighting vehicles. The specialist properties of high explosive incendiary, as the name suggests, if fired into the sides and rear of a target, they tend to have a much greater chance of causing engine fires. Well, I think that's just about exhausted the topic of ammunition choices and armour types, and hopefully you can see that while there are inevitable similarities between Armoured Warfare and World of Tanks, they're both tank battle games after all. Once you progress sufficiently far down the various different tech trees in Armoured Warfare, it turns into a radically different game with significantly different game mechanics. And it's mostly to do with the armour and the various different ammunition choices. But there are other differences as well, and that comes down to the different types of vehicle that are available in the game. We're going to take a quick look at those. This is the AMX-10P. It's fairly typical of the first class of vehicles available in Armoured Warfare, the armoured fighting vehicles. These are broadly similar in concept to the light tanks that you get in World of Tanks. These are the scouts. They're the eyes and ears of your team. They tend to be small, fast, lightly armed and lightly armoured, although some of them do have some nasty surprises. Some AFVs, like the Swingfire, come equipped with anti-tank guided missiles. Some, like the M551 Sheridan, come equipped with anti-tank guided missiles and a really big gun. But generally speaking, they tend to be small, fast, lightly armed and lightly armoured. They all get one ability in common, however, and this is tied to the E key, and it's the ability to designate a target for special attention by the rest of your team. When you have been lit up in this fashion by an armoured fighting vehicle, two things happen. First of all, you cannot hide. Even if you manage to successfully disengage and break line of sight from any enemy tank, you will remain detected as long as you remain under the effects of being designated by an armoured fighting vehicle. The other thing, and possibly the most significant thing that happens when you've been lit up by one of these little things, is every shot that hits and penetrates you is going to do the maximum possible damage range of the ammunition type that hits you. This is a bad thing. And it's why armoured fighting vehicles are such a massive pain in the arse to main battle tanks. Next, light tanks. It's difficult to draw a comparison between a light tank in Armoured Warfare and, well, anything in World of Tanks. They're kind of like World of Tanks light tanks, but they're also kind of like World of Tanks medium tanks. The light tanks in Armoured Warfare tend to be very, very fast, very lightly armoured, although they can be surprisingly tough to deal with from the front, and they have very, very big main battle tank guns. What makes the light tanks separate from the armoured fighting vehicles, the main battle tanks, the tank destroyers and the artillery, is the ability to go really, really fast when the situation demands it. Light tanks get an engine boost. This is tied to the E key. Press this button in a light tank in Armoured Warfare and you get a massive boost to your engine power for 5 seconds. It's basically a I need to get the hell out of here right now button. Or, as is more likely the case, it's the I really, really need to get to that last enemy tank and steal the kill on it before anybody else does button. Either works. Tank destroyers? Well, we've already seen tank destroyers. They tend to not have an awful lot of armour, but they tend to be pretty quick and manoeuvrable and have very, very nasty guns, as well as getting the sniper bonus and doing bonus damage when they engage targets at long range. They don't currently have any special ability tied to the E key, although Obsidian are talking about giving them some kind of ability that reduces the amount of concealment that they lose when they fire through cover. This will obviously be on a long cooldown and will be very short duration, otherwise it would be completely overpowered. Also, a lot of the tank destroyers in Armoured Warfare tend to be wheeled, not tracked vehicles, and this obviously introduces some entirely new elements into the gameplay when they start moving. You would be amazed at how difficult these things are to steer. Next, your main battle tanks. Tanks like the Chieftain, the M1 Abrams, the Challenger, the T80, the T72, the T62, the T54, the Object 430. Hang on a minute, these are fast medium tanks in World of Tanks. What's going on? Well, again, this is where comparisons between Armoured Warfare and World of Tanks start to fall apart. Yes, on the one hand, you could argue that the main battle tanks in Armoured Warfare are similar in concept and role to the heavy tanks in World of Tanks. Both types of vehicles depend on their armour and their big guns for their survivability and effectiveness in battle. But the main battle tanks, or heavy tanks if you like, in Armoured Warfare are modern tanks. And even the older models, like the T62 here down at Tier 3, manages a fairly respectable 44 km per hour under ideal circumstances, and this is one of the slower main battle tanks in the game. And as the tanks get more modern, with the introduction of turbine engines for example, the manoeuvrability and speed of these heavy tanks just, well, it renders the comparisons with heavy tanks in World of Tanks completely pointless. Main battle tanks in Armoured Warfare don't get any kind of special ability other than having big guns and a metric arse ton of effective frontal armour. One thing that does catch a lot of World of Tanks players out is attempting to side scrape the armour on their tank by angling the tank around a corner. This doesn't really work in Armoured Warfare. Well, it does, but it mostly doesn't. Try to angle a tank to the same degree that you would in World of Tanks, which is a perfectly valid tactic in World of Tanks, is not a good idea in Armoured Warfare. And it's not a good idea because main battle tanks have all of their armour at the front, and they have guns with very, very high penetration. So much penetration that if you were to expose more than 5 to 10 degrees of the side armour of your main battle tank, it's gonna get overmatched just by the sheer penetration factor of the kind of guns that are shooting back at you. When you're driving a main battle tank in Armoured Warfare, you have to be fearless. That doesn't necessarily mean stupid. I mean, you do have the heaviest armour of any class of vehicle in the game, but remember the armour is all at the front of your tank. Your side armour is not going to withstand the kind of firepower and penetration that modern guns, and more importantly modern ammunition, bring to the modern battlefield. This is not World of Tanks. Side scraping doesn't really work here. Don't try anything fancy. Front towards the enemy at all times. Finally, that brings us on to the artillery in Armoured Warfare, which I think is fantastic and is a perfect example of exactly how this particular kind of game mechanic should be implemented into this kind of game. I do not like the way artillery works in World of Tanks, and I suspect I am probably not alone in having that opinion. Beyond the fact that they both operate in a top-down mode and they fire in indirect fire mode, there are no similarities between the way the two different games implement this mechanic. For a start, every time artillery fires, their position is given away to the artillery players on the other team. So, if you play artillery in Armoured Warfare the same way you play artillery in World of Tanks, one hand on the mouse and the other hand scratching your big fat lazy ass, you're going to get killed very, very early on. In Armoured Warfare, you must move between shots, or the enemy artillery will pinpoint your location and they will kill you. I know Wargaming says that you should move between shots when you're playing artillery in World of Tanks, but you don't need to. The artillery on the opposing team aren't looking for you. There are all kinds of targets lit up on the map for them to be shooting at. Why would they waste time trying to shoot at something they can't see? And so that's the first thing Armoured Warfare did right. They implemented the mechanic whereby when artillery fires, they become visible to enemy artillery, and therefore making artillery a priority target for other artillery. That's the first thing they did right. The next thing they did right was to scale down the out-of-control damage and instead ramp up the accuracy and the rate of fire. So you do no more damage, and in a lot of cases substantially less damage because you're firing high explosive, than any other tank on your team. Then they started giving artillery some utility. What I'm doing here is targeting a smoke round. I'm going to give this guy some much needed cover so he doesn't get shot up. There are also illumination rounds, not available on the tier 3 artillery which I'm using here. Illumination rounds which fire a flare and light up any hidden vehicles in the target area. They've actually made artillery useful to the team, and not just for doing damage and accidentally team killing members of their own team because they're so hopelessly inaccurate. Nobody believed it could be done, but Obsidian Entertainment have achieved the impossible. They've implemented artillery into a tank combat game and made everybody not hate it. So, Armoured Warfare. Well, it's just World of Tanks with modern tank skins, isn't it? No, it really isn't. And I hope this video has not only shown that, but it's been useful to you guys who do play World of Tanks and have been considering having a go at Armoured Warfare but were turned off at the whole idea that it was basically just World of Tanks with modern tank skins. There's a lot more that I could talk about, but I won't because I've been talking for far too long. I haven't even begun to show you the retrofit system, or how you can completely skip the whole stock grind on a tank by grinding out the modules in PvE mode, so you never need to take a stock tank into a PvP battle again as long as you live. But I have to stop talking now or they're going to come and drag me away. If you are interested in more information, there's not a huge amount of community content available for Armoured Warfare in the same way that you've got things like World of Tanks Labs and status report blogs and things like that for World of Tanks. However, there is one resource that I can definitely recommend, the Armoured Talk blog by Spooky. In particular, he also features a guide specifically designed for World of Tanks players, much as I've done it in this video. Link to the blog and the article in question in the video description. And with that, I am finally going to put this video to bed before it turns into yet another hour-long extravaganza that people have to watch in relays. And on that bombshell, it's good night from me. Take care, folks, and I'll catch you next time.